All right. So this evening we're here with local author L.D. Zane. His anthology, It's Always My Fault and Other Short Stories, was published this year, correct?
That's correct. This
Yeah.
June.
Awesome. And it's available in the Berks County Library system, so you can actually place it on hold for yourself to borrow. Of course, you're also welcome to purchase your own copy. He served 7 years in the Navy from 1968 to 1975, included a combat tour in Vietnam on riverboats, 5 years aboard nuclear powered submarine. Um, Now he's retired and he's spending his time focusing on writing novels and short stories. And we're very happy to have him with us today. He's going to read a little bit and answer some questions for us. So, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for inviting me to your party. The if I want to certainly thank you and I guess the Spring Township Library
Mhm.
for hosting this, making this possible, and also to my very creative and talented publicist to my right, Angela Kremer, who makes all this technology on my end work because I am totally clueless when it comes to that type of technology. Be the first one to admit that. And certainly want to thank my very patient and tolerant wife, Gloria, who's allowing me to stay up past my bedtime.
Mhm.
The Thank you for the introduction.
Mhm.
Just a little bit more is that uh, my short stories, uh, as you mentioned, I do have my first anthology published, but my short stories have been published in over 2 dozen literary journals. Uh, you can find the published stories on my website, which is ldzaneauthor.com. Just very simple, no dots, no period, just ldzaneauthor.com. If you go there, it's a very easy to navigate. Angela made sure of that because I can navigate it, so it has to be easy. But there's a tab there that has all of my short stories that are published. Now, the reason that I don't have the unpublished short stories on there is very simple, is that the publishing industry has some very funky rules. And one of them is that even if a story is on a website, they consider it published and then they won't publish it. So you'll find the published stories on there if you want to read more. I would appreciate it. A lot of good stuff on the website, upcoming events, my bio, and some other good things on there. Uh, the I'm also a member of the Bold Writers, which is a writing group that started about 6 or 7 years ago. We used to meet at the Bold Cafe in West Reading, which is where we got our name. Now, because of COVID, we haven't been meeting at all, but we do keep in touch. And very simple, Jess. People have often asked me why I write, and the answer is very simple: is that I believe all stories, like people, have a destiny, and they both end the way they're supposed to. So I have no predetermined endings on any of my stories.
Hmm.
The I just want to read two stories tonight, two short stories that I think you've had a hand in selecting,
Mhm.
which I appreciate. They're two of some of my favorites. One of them is in the anthology. The other one, the second one, is not. Uh, that is just on my website, but that's okay. My anthology, which can also, if you go to my website, there is a, to be crass about it, there is a buy button there for my book. Hold it up. Uh, you want to buy this book? It's on Amazon. It's reasonably priced and it's a good read. I promise you, you will not be bored. The first story is called "It Happened Over Coffee and a Bagel." Just to give you some real quick background, is that most of my pieces are what we call creative nonfiction, and that is they're based on actual events with actual people. Obviously, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, and to those people who I didn't want to protect, they're in there too. They're the guilty. The But I've I just found that to be a niche of mine. I do write fiction, but creative nonfiction seems to be the genre I really kind of have gravitated towards. So this first one uh, actually happened because I was given a gift card when I used to work at my former employer. Uh, like I mentioned, it's Penske. It's where I retired from, and they gave us a gift card. And they gave us a gift card to Starbucks, and for some reason they thought that was a real treat. So I went to Starbucks, the one in Wyomissing, and the this is an event that happened, and then I kind of modified it to change some things. But hope you like it tonight. I just hope you just what I like you to do is to anybody listening to this is to just kind of sit back and relax, close your eyes, and kind of imagine as you hear the words, set the scene in your own mind. That is the best way to listen to any story, as far as I'm concerned. So, for your entertainment, it happened over coffee and a bagel. As I waited for my order at Starbucks, someone from behind me asked, Avi, that's short for the Hebrew name Avraham. Are you Jewish? I turned to see who was speaking to me. He was a stocky young man sporting a beard, about 5'10", perhaps in his early 20s, and appeared to be Semitic. Yeah, it's short for Abraham, and I'm Jewish. What about it? Avi, my late parents, more precisely my mother, thought sending me to Hebrew school during the school year, beginning when I turned 8, and to Brooklyn to study at a Hasidic yeshiva for 1 month during the summer break until my bar mitzvah at the age of 13 would thwart my juvenile delinquent behavior. It didn't. But I always had a thirst for understanding how and why things were the way they were. The more I learned, the more questions I had. 20 Question Avi was my nickname while attending religious schools. Surprisingly, I was a better student at the religious schools than I ever was at the secular ones. I never found my secular studies challenging. Anyway, the rabbis at the yeshiva referred to me by my Hebrew name, Avraham ben Lazer, which translated to Avraham, the son of Lazer. It got shortened by others in my classes from an early age to just Avi. It's come to be a term of endearment, and to this day, I have only allowed a select few to use the name. The stranger wasn't one of them. Assalamu alaikum is how he greeted me. That's Arabic. Are you Arab? Actually, Palestinian. I glared at him for a moment and then responded, same difference. He smiled. I beg to differ, but this is neither the time nor place for that discussion. I continued to stare and said, you can beg to differ all you want. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to discuss. But the show wasn't a complete bore. I responded to his greeting, wa alaikum assalam. I usually don't venture into Starbucks. The coffee is overpriced and overrated for my taste. They're always crowded. It's located on the wrong side of town, the affluent side, called the Hills, and most of the patrons, at least to me, are pretentious. Everyone is on their laptop or tablet. I have no idea what they're doing, nor do I care. The only reason I came this time was because I had one of their $30 gift cards, which I won in a contest at work, and I had some time to kill on my day off, 2 days before New Year's Eve. I don't know why our company thinks going to Starbucks is a gift. I was standing in line looking over the menu of coffees. I became overwhelmed, and I'm not easily subjugated by fits of indecision. Not only were there 2 boards, but each selection had a calorie count and at least 3 sizes from which to choose. There were 2 women in front of me agonizing over what to order. They finally settled on the type of coffee they wanted, but then anguished about the size in order to stay within the prescribed daily caloric intake. Finally, one of them said, oh, the hell with it. Who am I fooling? I stopped counting calories on Thanksgiving. I'm even going to get it with whipped cream. The other agreed, and they gleefully placed their order. What happened to coffee for here? I was up next and made it simple for the cashier. Medium house blend and a toasted bagel with cream cheese. That's it? Just plain coffee, she said with condescension. Yeah, just plain old coffee. Regular or decaf? Regular. I like caffeine. The inquisition continued. What kind of bagel? What kind do you have? She pointed to the menu and said, everything, raisin, or plain. Just plain bagel, I responded. Whole wheat, multi-grain, or gluten-free. I thought, Christ, does someone in their corporate office sit around all day thinking of ways to make this so damn difficult? None of the above, I said curtly. Do you have any made with real flour? No, just whole wheat, multi-grain, or gluten-free. Fine, I'll take the whole wheat. How do you want it toasted? I rolled my eyes and said, almost burnt. Regular cream cheese or low fat? You're kidding, I said incredulously. She just stared at me. I looked at her name tag and asked, is your nickname 20 Questions, Sarah? She didn't respond. Instead, she asked again as if she were an automaton. Regular cream cheese or low fat? Regular. I'm not counting anything except the time it's taken me to order a cup of coffee and a toasted bagel. And your name for the order, please, she said without looking at me. Avi. I gave that name out of spite. Amazingly, she didn't have 20 questions about it. I'm sure she never attended yeshiva, I thought. Do you also need my social security number? No response from the other than, that'll be $7.90. She swiped the gift card and handed it back to me. You have $22.10 left on the card. You can wait over there for your order. We'll call you when it's ready. I was afraid to ask, but deemed it necessary. Can I get the coffee with cream? You'll find the condiments on the other side of the counter from where you pick up your order. There's whole milk, skim milk, organic milk, and half. Of course, I said with a sarcastic smile. Wouldn't have expected anything less. As I was waiting with the others, including the two women who each ordered a large something, white something or other with whipped cream, I heard the voice from behind me ask the question. The Palestinian had an ever so slight British accent and a broad, hefty smile showing off his perfectly white, straight teeth. From his speech and smile, he didn't appear to be someone who grew up in the ghetto in Gaza. I'm surprised you know Arabic, he said. You spoke it flawlessly. I thought you would have responded with the Hebrew greeting, Shalom. The same thought crossed my mind. You knew I was Jewish, but chose to greet me in Arabic. That said, I always respond in kind, I said snarkily. Ah, yes, a hint of hostility, he said, smiling. He paused. My greeting was more natural as my native tongue. No offense meant. Nonetheless, I appreciate your greeting and the effort behind it. Just then, a young man behind the counter shouted, Avi, coffee and bagel. I realized then that I should have ordered more as I worked up an appetite just placing it. I grabbed my nourishment before I went searching for a quiet table where there were no electronic devices in use and doused my coffee with half and half. I turned to the Palestinian. With the same intensity in my voice as in my glare, I said, don't confuse hostility with suspicion. He dropped the smile. I found that table and assumed I would be able to savor my feast in peace. I was wrong. The Palestinian stood next to me and asked, may I join you? He was also reading light. He had a tea and a Danish of some kind. I wonder if they had given him the third degree as well. I didn't want company, but I also didn't want to appear rude, although that rarely stopped me before. But the kid had a pleasant demeanor, if not intrusive, and was dressed in a preppy manner. It wasn't as if he just stepped off the boat. I said with no welcoming smile or tone, please, have a seat across from me where I can see your hands. That's quite insulting. Then find another seat. I wasn't looking for company. I sipped my regular coffee and started to spread my regular cream cheese on my barely toasted bagel. Holding it over my lighter would have toasted it darker. To my astonishment and disappointment, the Palestinian appeared directly across from me. He put his food down, sat, and then laid both of his hands on the table, palms up. It seemed to me he had done this before. There, satisfied, he appeared greatly annoyed, but I wasn't sure if his irritation was directed at me, my request, or his compliance. Are you checking for weapons or just want to see if I wash before eating? Good comeback, I thought, and chuckled to myself. Both, I said, slightly looking up. I like to know I'll be able to finish my meal, old habit from Vietnam. and I have a fetish for cleanliness. He didn't appear to have any weapons, and his hands were clean. As I said, don't confuse hostility with suspicion. But why would you be suspicious? I don't believe I've given you any reason. This time I did look up at him. I gave a one-word answer: history. We both sat in refreshing silence for a few moments. I was fixated on my bland bagel. Then he started up again. Is Avi your given name? He said in a more congenial tone. I sighed and said, slightly exasperated, no, it's Alan. Avi is just a carryover from my youth. Mine is Abdul Basir Al Hamdani, and enthusiastically stuck out his hand. Pleasure to meet you. Once again, I was faced with the decision. Why can't I just order and eat without being interrogated? I can't remember the last time I had to make so many useless decisions. I put my plastic knife and shook his hand, but didn't look directly at him. I couldn't bring myself to say, pleasure to meet you as well. Instead, I offered up, Abdul Basir, servant of the All-Seeing, correct? The young man dropped his Danish. I'm indeed impressed, Avi. Then he caught himself. My apologies for using that name. That was quite presumptuous of me. No harm done, Abdul Basir. I opened that door. I said, still preparing my bagel for consumption. A profound look of relief crossed his face. Then call me Basir if it pleases you. What would please me more, Basir, is if you would allow me to drink my overpriced coffee and eat this poor resemblance of a bagel before they both get cold. Cold coffee I can handle, but not a cold bagel with cream cheese, especially this bagel. Absolutely. But may I ask just one more question? Is your nickname 20 Question Basir? He stared at me, not knowing what I was asking. Never mind, I said. It's an inside joke. Go ahead. Ask your question. Thank you. You're welcome, I said under my breath. Something tells me you would have asked it no matter what my answer was. He didn't hear me. If he did, he ignored my comment. He fiddled with his tea for a moment and then asked, how did you know the meaning of my name? I mean, I've been studying at Columbia University for almost 4 years now, and not one person, not one outside of the other Arabic students who already knew, ever asked me the meaning of my name. I'm a virtual cornucopia of useless knowledge, Basir. And I've also been to Israel many times to visit friends. There are things you just learn through osmosis. Very interesting, Avi. Are you afraid when you visit Israel? I looked squarely at him and snapped back. No. Should I be? No, but there are risks. From whom? You and your friends? He shot back defiantly. I've never done any act of civil disobedience or terror. Never? Really? You've never tossed a rock, a bomb, or a Molotov cocktail in an Israeli patrol or tank? Never launched a rocket into an unsuspecting civilian neighborhood? His coal black eyes burst into flames, and he pounded his right fist on the table. I said, never, Avi, and I meant it, never. A couple seated near us looked over, greatly miffed that we'd interrupted their bomb with their devices. I paid them no mind. I made no apologies. Well, that struck a nerve, I thought. Let's see where this goes. He composed himself and continued. My parents would not have tolerated that type of behavior. Some of my former friends have and still do, but not me. So, you do have friends who engage in acts of terror. I said former friends, and they are acts of civil disobedience, not terror. Yeah, one man's act of civil disobedience is another man's act of terror. So where are these former friends of yours? The level of his voice dropped, as did his head. They want nothing to do with me. They are ashamed of me. He reflected for a moment, then raised his head and spoke directly at me. Why do you keep associating me with those who engage in acts of terror? I'm not now, nor have I ever been a terrorist. I've never injured another human. Like I said, history. You may not believe this, but not all Palestinians embrace the same history. I wanted to say, you're right. I don't believe you, but I kept my mouth shut, surprisingly. Instead, I pivoted. Well, there are risks here, Basir. Besides, I stay with friends when I'm in Israel. Most served in the IDF. Some served with Mossad. Are you afraid here? It's true. There have been times when I've been concerned for my safety. His demeanor again became more solemn. But I am more concerned for my safety when I go back home, which I haven't done in a while, which much to the dismay of my parents and siblings. And why is that? There, that you're concerned for your safety back home. Basir again bowed his head and spoke in a subdued tone, because I have not taken up the same cause of my childhood friends have. They believe I am not among the faithful, that I have betrayed them. Have you betrayed them? And took another sip of my coffee and bite out of my bagel. I don't believe so. I believe in the same outcome, just not in the manner which to achieve it. Violence only begets violence. There's a time for everything, Basir. Violence is one of them. Perhaps, but not toward the innocent. My tone softened. On that, we both agree. I pressed on. And you believe these former friends of yours may try to harm you? I do not know. That's what concerns me. Let's see how far I can push this, I thought. And what cause exactly are we speaking of? Although I knew what cause it was. I sensed he didn't want to venture any further into this conversation. I really didn't want to either, and quickly pulled back. I spoke with a calm but yet commanding voice. Don't answer that. He gave an involuntary deep sigh of relief that we weren't going to pursue that discussion. We both knew the outcome could have, no, more likely would have been explosive. So I changed the subject. So what's with the British accent? You are indeed observant, Avi. My compliments. Both of my parents were doctors and completed their undergraduate studies in England. They sent me there to a boarding school when I turned 8 years old. I didn't want to go and be so far from home for such a long time, but they insisted it was best for me. Yeah, been there, done that. Now fully engaged with my bagel. Your parents sent you to a boarding school as well? I wanted to explain my religious exile and imprisonment and to add, does reform school count? But he didn't, but decided he wouldn't understand, and I was in no mood to explain. No, not exactly, but I had the same feelings through my schooling, and so did my parents. I quickly asked another question. So how did you wind up at Columbia? My father made that decision for me. He and my mother studied medicine there. That's where they met. Where would you have preferred to study? I would have been content at Tel Aviv University. It would have been closer to home, and it would have been a first-rate education. But Columbia has a more worldwide reputation. Besides, didn't you say you were afraid of going home? He became adamant and said, almost shouting, I said I was concerned for my safety. I didn't say I was afraid. Basir paused and lowered his voice. But it's still home, and took a deep breath. This is not. I could see tears forming in his eyes. I knew that feeling, what it felt like to be away from home. In addition to being shipped off to Brooklyn every summer in my stints in reform school, I served 7 years in the Navy. Part of that was a combat tour on river boats in Vietnam, where I was wounded and then recuperated for 4 months at a military hospital in Hawaii. And the other part was serving aboard a fast attack submarine based at Pearl. I had no desire to go home, but I missed it all the same. Hey, Basir, I know you won't believe this, but I do understand what you're feeling. I really do. I continue with the questions. It's just my nature. So are you going to become a doctor? I'm not sure, but I have to decide very soon. I'm in my senior year. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do your parents want you to do? We both know the answer to that question, Avi. What do you want to do? After all, it is your life. At that question, he became more passionate. I want to pursue mathematics. I'm good at it, and I love it. Many of my professors have encouraged me to follow that path. So do it. What's holding you back? Disapproval and disappointment of my parents, and money. Yeah, know that feeling as well. Seems that's universal with kids and parents. Same shit, different culture. I've been on both sides of that equation, having raised 3 children. Disappointment and disapproval go both ways, even between spouses. Basir leaned forward. I believe I know what you mean. I see it every day with the American students, but more so with the foreign ones. If I don't pursue a medical degree, I'm concerned my parents will not help me with my finances to extend my education. Concerned or afraid, Basir, which one? Both, Avi. There is no way I could afford to finance my own advanced degree. It's difficult enough for those who are born here. No one would lend me the money. He started to fidget with his plastic spoon. There was anxiety in his voice when he said, but if I do become a doctor, my parents will want me to practice in Gaza, in Israel, as they do. They are apolitical and well respected in both places, but they too come under a great deal of pressure from all sides, as I would. I'm not as strong as they are. I truly don't know what to do. This kid is caught between a rock and a hard place, I thought. I'd been there many times, unfortunately, but I was stronger than he appeared to be. I had to be. I had no safety net. For most of my life, I had to rely on myself. Some of that was my choice. Some of it was because, well, I brought it on myself. I attempted another angle for the young Palestinian to consider, although I didn't quite understand why. You've probably played cricket, correct? Of course, and I'm quite good, if I must say so myself. Well, I'm a big baseball fan, and there's a saying, swinging for the fences. We have a different saying, but I know the meaning. What do you think it means, Basir? You go for it, try and get the home run and perhaps even win the game. That's true, but you might strike out or otherwise fail to get it out of the park. That's true, Avi, but no one knows until one tries, right? As he said that, I saw an aha look on his face. He just sat there, staring into space as if he were watching a movie playing inside his head. Then he nodded his head in agreement. It appeared Basir had come to some conclusion. Perhaps he finally made the connection and now believes he can change his own future. Perhaps he came to the conclusion that he is stronger than he thought. And then something strange happened to me, something I never thought would happen between me and a Palestinian. Am I feeling empathy for Basir? We shared some similar experiences, and both of us had decisions to make. Maybe neither of us realized at the time that they came with consequences, some of them negative. I know I didn't, but we made them nonetheless. I had swung for the fences many times and was willing to let the chips fall where they may. Basir had already done it once before, even if he didn't realize he had, and I believe he was ready to do it again. Perhaps he was more prepared this time. Funny thing happens, though, when you swing for the fences. Whether you get a home run or strike out, there'll always be those who will say you made the wrong decision. It's bad enough when we second guess ourselves, but even when we don't, there'll always be those who will. What's on your mind, Basir? I think, no, I believe I have a solution to my dilemma. And what is that? Forgive me, Avi, but I'd rather not say it this time. I'm not quite confident of all the details or ramifications, but it is a solution, or at least a plan. I gave a genuine smile and said, good for you. A plan is better than nothing. But you know what validates a plan? Please tell me. Acting on it. Basir looked relieved, more relieved than he had during the entire conversation. There was an assurance about him. I was confident that whatever his plan was, he would somehow, some way, make it work, and I was happy for him. At that moment, several thoughts raced through me. What the hell just happened? And what was happening to me? Was I going soft? At any other time, I would have told this kid to buzz off, that it was his problem to solve, not mine. I would have said good luck, maybe, but certainly would have said goodbye. I was as finished with my coffee and bagels I ever would. I should be going, Basir, and I have some errands to run. But before I go, I have just one more question. Certainly, Avi, what is it? What brings you here, to my city? My roommate is from your city. He lives close by and generously invited me to stay with his family over our winter break. Interestingly enough, he is Jewish and his father is a doctor. Who would have thought? That doesn't surprise me. This is a very affluent neighborhood, mostly made up of professionals, and there are many Jewish families who reside here. Do you reside here? Nope. I live on the other side of town. It's not quite as affluent, but it's nice, and I call it home. Have you discussed your dilemma with your roommate or his father? Only with my roommate. He's facing a similar dilemma, and I didn't want to, what's the saying, muddy the waters? He doesn't know how to approach his parents either. Yep, that's the saying, and you're wise not getting in the middle of that situation. My compliments on your judgment. Perhaps after you're sure of your plan, you might want to suggest it to him. Then let him do with it as he sees fit. As you did with me, he said with a newfound resilience. So let him decide whether or not to swing for the fences. Is that what you're suggesting, Avi? Precisely. We stood, disposed of our trash, which included half of my bagel and an unfinished cup of coffee, and ventured into the parking lot. Before I headed for my car, I asked, for some unknown reason, you want to ride? I appreciate the offer, Avi, but I believe I'll walk. It's only a few blocks and I know the way. Besides, a nice day and the walk will help me to think through all of this. Perhaps I'll take the long way as it'll give me more time. Fair enough. Well then, I suppose this is goodbye. Basir just stood there. Neither of us paid any attention to the cars or people moving about on the lot. Then he said, perhaps, if you would agree, of course, we could, just spit it out, although I had an idea what he was going to ask. Well, keep in touch. Communicate from time to time. I know I would enjoy hearing from you, Avi. I don't have many people. Actually, I have no one to really confide in. And I found it very easy to converse with you. Really? Not many people have ever said that. And I certainly didn't expect you to hold that sentiment. I wasn't exactly welcoming you at first. But to answer your question, yes, I would enjoy hearing from you as well. I was stunned. The words just fell out of my mouth. He lit up a broad smile and said, don't confuse hostility with suspicion, right, Avi? And gave a deep belly laugh. I smiled and laughed as well. This kid has some moxie. I reached for my pen, but realized I had nothing to write on. I said, don't move, Basir. I'll be right back. I went inside and grabbed a napkin. I didn't want to ask any of the staff if they had some scrap paper. And thank God I had a pen. I can only imagine the myriad of questions that would have been hurled my way. Do you want a pen or pencil? Black or blue ink? Gel or regular ink? How big of a piece of paper? Recycled or new? My head was swimming. I wrote my email address and cell number on it and brought it back to Basir, who was patiently waiting. Here, you'll find all my contact info on the napkin. I'll get your email address when you write to me. So you're counting on me on writing to you first? You got it, Basir. It's on you. Fair enough, Avi. Just do me one favor. And what might that be? Don't share this with any of your former friends back home. I don't need to be on any government watch list, and feigned a scowl. Basir looked mortified until he saw me crack a smile. He laughed and said, you're just fooling with me, Avi. And then the same concern looked across his face. Aren't you? Yes, just playing, Basir. He gave a sigh of relief and said, I don't know you well enough to know when you're kidding. Remember that. Keep your own counsel. Only share your deepest thoughts and feelings with whom you believe you can absolutely trust. Unfortunately, you'll find that there will be few in them. I've learned the hard way that you just never know who will attempt to use it against you someday. Understand, I have so much to learn. For what it's worth, we all have a lot to learn. It never stops, or at least it shouldn't. You're doing fine, Basir. He gave me one of his trademark smiles and stuck out his chest. He apparently didn't receive too many compliments. Basir studied the napkin for a few moments, then looked at me and said in his most sincere tone, you're a wise and generous man, Avi. I believe I can trust you. I didn't know how to respond, which is usually not the case. I looked down, nodded my head, then looked directly at him and said, again, not sentiments most people hold about me, but thank you. You're a thoughtful young man, and I believe I can trust you as well. Again he smiled, and a melancholy look came over him. Well then, I should be on my way, Avi, as you must. Perhaps we can meet here again. Not here. I don't like this place. He became animated. I know what you mean, Avi. The tea here is putrid and overpriced. The Danish selection is limited and not always fresh. They're always crowded, and everyone is on their laptop or tablet. They've lost the art of spirited conversation, which is another reason I enjoyed my time with you. You are not afraid to speak your mind in a civil manner. I had to laugh at his assessment of Starbucks and that he believed I spoke my mind in a civil manner. Yet another attribute most would not assign to me. But he was spot on about the attachment people have to their machines. Whatever happened to two people just sharing coffee and a conversation? He continued, perhaps we can meet at one of the local diners. I have been to a few in New York and New Jersey, and I know of one not too far from here. My roommate has taken me there on several occasions. They are much more welcoming, far less intrusive, and inexpensive. After all, I am still a student on a limited stipend. I have also become quite fond of the American breakfast, minus the bacon, of course. Of course. That would work for me, Basir. You and I share the same taste in food and venue. I know several places and the one you speak of. Drop me a line or call. I'm sure we can work out a time. How long are you going to be in town? For about another week, he then said with childish enthusiasm. I promise I'll write or call or both. And one more thing, Avi. What's that? Please call me, perhaps in about a year or so, should you have the opportunity to visit Israel. Why is that? Because that is part of my plan to go back home. Outstanding. I sincerely hope you make it work. Also, make it a part of your plan to talk with your parents. You might find them to be more supportive than you think. And I promise to see you if and when I return to Israel. I paused. Then it's settled. Breakfast and possibly a visit with you in Israel. I look forward to both, Basir. I know you must be on your way, Avi. He stuck out his hand. This time I didn't hesitate to shake it. It was a pleasure meeting you, Abdul Basir. So you see, Abraham, two people can change history, yes? Yeah, that's usually the way it happens, one person at a time. Basir remembered how he greeted me at first and switched it up. Shalom, my friend. I responded in kind. I always do. Shalom, peace be with you, my friend. We separated, but something told me our lives would forever be connected. What the hell just happened?
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. I love there's when I read the line about I don't know why our company thinks going to Starbucks as a gift, I just genuinely giggled.
Yeah,
There are quite a few lines like that that I thought, oh, that's so relatable. And
yeah, I don't know. For some reason, everybody thinks that everybody's just waiting with bated breath to go there.
yes, absolutely. That seems to be the case. I
Did,
mean, who am I kidding? I go there sometimes, but
yeah. But did you have any questions about the story or?
Um, I think so. This is based on something that actually happened.
Mhm.
That's the inspiration.
Right.
And I thought what I really found interesting about it was that it was almost like it's almost like reading a micro study of, you have this huge conflict that's happening on the other side of the world. And I think for many Americans, we probably feel pretty disconnected from that. But the effects of that are very far reaching. And this really brought it home to these two particular people and how that affects them. And also how there can still be optimism in that. And like, towards the end of the story, you said that's how change happens. It happens with these two people. So when you was this kind of that moment, was that like a journey for you where you maybe didn't have, because Avi sounds to me like it was reluctant optimism. It wasn't whereas for Basir it was more eager. He had he hungered for that.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Abdul Basir was he was caught in it on a daily basis when he was growing up. So for him, this was very personal. For Avi, it was personal because of friendships that he had and because of his ties with Israel,
Mhm.
uh, both religiously and culturally. He had his ties there. But to you're right, to Basir, this was very personal. He still had former friends there, he still had family there, and he had to deal with it.
Mhm.
Uh, Avi didn't have to. But you're right, Avi was willing, but cautiously optimistic because he's looking at it as what he always said. This is not, don't confuse uh, suspicion with history
Mhm.
because Avi's looking at this from a historical viewpoint. Uh, so he has his reservations and probably always will, but he's willing to give this kid a chance because he's looking at this kid's problems as almost parallel to his growing up. He has the same challenges, he has to make the same decisions. And where Basir is willing to, as you said, more eagerly do it, Avi's willing to go that distance. And I think because he took it that this kid, he believed them that, okay, this kid has nothing to do with what's happened.
Right.
He's actually trying to get out of it.
Mhm.
So don't hold him, as the saying goes, don't hold the son accountable for the sins of the father.
Right.
And that's where Avi has to make that distinction. I can't hold this kid responsible for what other people are doing. So you're right. It's a good observation. Avi is kind of cautiously optimistic, but more so he's willing to give this kid a chance only because he sees this kid in the same predicament that he saw himself growing up.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's really true of any, you know, getting to know somebody on a personal level is always going to make the biggest difference because you gain empathy for that person as you get to know and walk a little bit in their shoes. When you're willing to listen and you're willing to hear that Bazir's experiences in life and found them to be more relatable, then that's the seed of empathy. That's when you're able to become empathetic.
Well, I think Avi's last comment to himself is, "What the hell just happened?"
Yeah.
He didn't even know this change came over him so quickly
Hmm.
that he really didn't know what had happened. He intellectually he knew what was happening, but he this thing just steamrolled over him.
Yeah.
So as he puts it, he's all of a sudden he finds himself in a position where he's actually, as you said, he's becoming empathetic to this kid,
Hmm.
and he can't believe he's doing it
Right.
because he's never been empathetic to any Palestinian or Arab or anybody on the other side, as far as he was concerned. So you're right. Empathy is that one human quality that if you can achieve it, uh, it changes a lot of things. The problem is most of us, myself included, sometimes don't put a whole lot of effort into it.
Right. Yeah. And of course, in this case, because Bazir was so, he kept pushing. He
Oh,
kind of forced you into that position, into Avi into that position where,
well, the real Basir, the kid I met, this kid was just unrelenting. I
yeah.
mean, it was just absolutely almost to the point of being obnoxious. And I tried to make him a little bit softer here, but this kid just was absolutely just. It was. He sat down across from me. It was just, I need to ask you another question. And that's why I said, "Is your name 20 question Basir?"
Yeah.
I mean, this kid just didn't want to shut up.
Yeah.
And finally, when he hit a nerve with me, and then when I knew when I said, "Oh, so your your friends are terrorists,"
Mm.
that hit a nerve with him.
Yeah.
And And I think that's when Avi starts to realize, okay, I'm going to push this. But he's also looking at it and going, hey, that's where he says, what causes are we talking about?
Hmm.
And then he backs off and says, you know what? Don't answer that. We're not going to go there.
Yeah.
Because at this point now, Avi's playing the game and he realizes this is not a game you want to play.
Right. Yeah. Well, I very much enjoyed it. And I also
Thank
enjoy
you.
the fact that on the website you have available the stories by beverage, the companion guide with drink.
Ah, you
Now,
saw that.
admittedly, I did not read this while drinking a Manhattan, but I almost need to go back and do that.
I, I am telling you, for those of you who hopefully will take a, buy the book, buy the anthology. I do have, as Jess mentioned, uh, I'll show it to you. It's called Stories by Beverage, and you can see it right here.
I love it.
And with each of the stories, I've selected a specific alcoholic beverage to go with it. And the question everybody says, have you tried this? And the answer is absolutely. This is how I came up with them. But they all work with that story. But then again, other ones might work. For this one, yeah, I had a Manhattan for this one. But for other ones, there are other things, whiskey and beer and
Yeah.
wine, everything else. So yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed that. That was solely my idea about the beverage that go along with the story. I
Okay.
think it actually makes the stories better.
Enhances the experience.
There you
I
go.
believe it. Yeah,
There you
very
go.
awesome. All right, and I think you're gonna read National Hippo Day as well, right?
Yep. This is a much shorter piece. Uh, just to give you some context, is that uh, going through it, when I was going through my divorce, I had three children, and my son was oldest, so he was already pretty much out of the house. But my two daughters uh, were still there when my wife and I had separated and were divorcing. Uh, and it was kind of a contentious relationship. Unfortunately, now thankfully, all these years later, it's now better, a lot better. But at this time, it was not very good, and but it was starting to get on the mend. Uh, the narrator here is my youngest daughter, so this is all in my head. How I'm imagining how she would tell this story. Is that, you good with that?
Yep.
So the story is called National Hippo Day. Hey Dad, FYI, my text started. Did you know today is National Hippo Day? I don't know what possessed me to send that message to him. There was nothing remotely rational about it. Why would I have brought this alleged national event to my father's attention? A man who I've only spoken to in person on maybe a handful of occasions in the last dozen years. Most times I don't even want to acknowledge that he's my father. I certainly don't bask in the glow that I'm his daughter. Hippos are seen as huggable, docile, and sweet. The Disney movie Fantasia even had them dancing in tutus. I couldn't have been more than 8 years old when my father took me to see the movie, and I laughed until I cried at that scene. About 3 years later, I was fitted for braces. They didn't warn me that a few teeth would have to be pulled. The dentist put me out for the extraction. I was still groggy when my father took me home. He carried me to my room, laid me on my bed, placed my favorite new stuffed animal, a long-eared rabbit I named Flops, in my arms and covered me. As I was about to drift off, my father came back into my room. He was still in his dress shirt, tie, and suit pants, but had a towel wrapped around his waist in the shape of a tutu. Then he danced around like one of those hippo ballerinas as he serenaded me with the music from the movie. Once again, I laughed hysterically. He curtsied when he finished his performance, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Get some rest, sweetheart. I'll be downstairs if you need me." I don't remember much after that, except I believe I had a smile on my face as I fell asleep. Hippos in reality are not the huggable creatures portrayed in so many stories or pictures. Just ask a crocodile, assuming you could, who's invaded the hippo space. It's not pretty. I had turned 14. My parents, after 31 years of marriage, separated. More accurately, my father left us. He left me. His departure didn't come as a surprise to my older sister, brother, and me. For many years, we witnessed a train wreck in the making, but chose to ignore the reality. In retrospect, I can't lay it all at my father's feet. My mother wasn't blameless. Nonetheless, the separation and the ensuing divorce proceeding shredded our lives. My brother escaped to college. He was the fortunate one. The house where we had grown up, the only home my sister and I had ever known, had to be sold when my father stopped paying the mortgage. He gave some bullshit reason that his divorce attorney advised him to do so because he no longer could afford it. Left with no alternative, the three of us moved in with my maternal grandmother, who lived in a suburb of the city. My mother had to lie where we were living so my sister and I could stay in our former school district. We weren't the first children of divorced parents, and I know it could have been worse. My sister and I still had a roof over our heads, food on the table, and saw our friends daily at school, but it was never the same. We might as well have lived on the dark side of the moon. My father's new residence was only a few miles from us, but I had no desire to see him. As far as I was concerned, he had committed an act of treason against us, and I wasn't about to play the part of a crocodile. Nor would I forgive him for not supporting us, although I learned the truth years later, and not from my mother, that my father was giving financial support to us all along. Forgiveness has never come easy for me. So why the text about National Hippo Day? I don't recall how or when it actually began, but my father and I started to communicate, sporadically, mostly through text messages. He usually initiated them other than when I would send one for his birthday or Father's Day, if I had the inclination or remembered to do so. I have yet to return one of his voicemails. He sends me cards and gifts on my birthday and other holidays, but I have never sent him one for any reason. Perhaps it's because the pictures I've kept from when we were together, and randomly survey, like the one where I poked my head out of a pile of leaves he had just raked, and he looked down at me and acted surprised. Or perhaps it's the picture that I still carry of me as a young girl, sitting on his lap, bangs down to my eyebrows, with an ear-to-ear grin, hugging him with my arms around his neck, taken shortly after we had seen Fantasia. Most likely it's the indelible vision I have of a young man in business attire, dancing around like a hippo ballerina in a makeshift tutu, doing his best to make his little girl laugh. I believe my message made my father smile. He sent back a text and thanked me, and added he was embarrassed that he wasn't aware of such an important event. The message was capped off with a smiley face. Forgiveness might just be a text away. Maybe.
Very good. I appreciate about that one, and also the I just read what is it? 1 and 3?
Oh, 1 out of 3.
1 out of 3, yes.
So
Um
you read that online because it's not in the anthology.
yes, yeah, I read that online. And that, I think between those two, there's definitely a lot of raw honesty in that, for you as a father. And in this case, because you're writing it from the viewpoint of your daughter, what was that
Right.
process like for you? Like, did you have to go through a certain did you have to prepare yourself emotionally to do that, or?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I did imbibe heavily on that one when I wrote it. It was because at first when uh, I wrote it as the first person. It was me telling the story. And then I rewrote it as just an anonymous narrator telling the story about the daughter and the father. And at some point, I think I made I made the decision, and this was the most difficult decision. I thought, you know what? I'm going to write it from her viewpoint. I'm going to write it because I knew, I had a good sense of how she felt about me and whether it was just or unjust. Uh, you know, I took that chance and I wrote it from her perspective and tried to be as honest and candid as I could, how she would have really written it if this were her story. And the answer to your question that you may be thinking, no, she doesn't know I wrote this. In fact, none of my children know that I even write.
Mm.
And I kind of kept it that way. Uh, I suppose the day of my demise, they'll find out, and in which case, uh, my youngest daughter will read that story, National Hippo Day. I'm hoping she looks at it and goes, you know what, he was spot on,
Mm-hmm.
rather than why would he dare to even do this? It could go either way.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, 1 out of 3, I wrote those two. Actually, they were written some time apart, but 1 out of 3 I wrote first.
Mm.
And yeah, that was, anybody gets a chance to go to ldzaneauthor.com. That is on there. Uh, I forgot that was on there, but so uh, but it is a very raw story, both of these. And I think anytime you write about family situations, especially divorce, uh, those emotions are always going to be raw. I don't care how much time separates it; they're always there, right below the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. Even in my case, I'm a product of divorce myself. So, and now I'm a parent. So it is interesting reading both of those from two separate, having grown up in a household with parents that were divorced, and now growing up, I'm happily married, and, our family unit looks so drastically different from what mine
Mhm.
did as a child. But imagining those kind of struggles with my own son as he grows up, that's kind of hard. But I agree. And even, as far as divorces go, my family's was uh not that complicated. But regardless of how you look at it, or how not bad it was, and how much time passes, there's still pain there and emotion, raw emotion, like you said. So yeah, it
Yeah,
was very interesting. I
children
read that.
and children, depending on their age. Now, my children were in their teens, and like I said, my son was the older one. But still, as I was trying to be as candid as I could,
Mhm.
and that's why. And it was at some point, a number of years after that, actually I wrote that, where she did tell me, she came up with the line. She said, you know what, I can't blame you entirely.
Mm.
She said, it was a train wreck in the making, and all of us saw it. So that's where I got that from.
Yeah.
So she she saw it, but since I'm the one that left, I was the bad guy.
Right.
And you know what? And it's fine. I look back on it now, but but yeah, that story really. I've had so many people that have actually responded when it got published, and said that it just hit a nerve with them.
Hmm. Yeah. I can definitely, I can see why. Um, just some broader questions.
Sure, please.
Were you always drawn to writing, or did you write when you were younger? Or is this something that you discovered more as an adult?
Uh, yeah, the shorter answer is I didn't really start writing until my early 60s. Uh, I'm older than that now, as you can see. Uh, but there was a period of time from the separation and divorce until I got remarried. It was probably the better part of almost 15 years. And in that period, as you say, you go through a lot of adjustments, Jess.
Hmm.
And you go through that stages, they talk about the 12 steps that you go through, the grieving,
Hmm.
and I really, I had gone through a period where it was anger, confusion, just I felt lost. I had a supervisor uh, at Penske, and we both worked kind of like a second shift because I was in the call center. And he was divorced as well. So after our shift was over, maybe at 9 o'clock at night, it was like, well, what do we do? Well, we go to the diner. And we used to always go to West Reading Diner, since neither of us had anything else better to do with our lives. But over time, I told him about my life growing up, which you read some of it in. It happened over coffee and a bagel, about my military experience. And he said, you ought to put this down on paper. You really should. I said, well, I've never written anything. He said, you know what? And he had a book published since then. He said, you know what? Just start writing. Make it, don't, change the names, but keep it as real as possible. And I'll help you as you go along. As you write maybe each chapter or each thing, I'll look at it and I'll help mentor you along. I said, well, that's cool. Well, I mean, we met 3 times a week at the diner.
Mm-hmm.
And I would send him my stuff. He would look it, correct it, send back. And it got to a point, though, where in my real story, where he said, okay, from this point on, you have to make this fictional. You have to make the break between the reality and the fiction. And this is where you do it. And I want you to write it now as a fictional story moving forward. I said, I have no idea. He said, you know what? Figure it out. And I did. And I would send him each chapter. He would correct it. And as he corrected it, at some point, he just said, Jesse said, you know what? Finish this. Don't even bother sending it. Just finish it. Mm-hmm. I finished it, got it edited, still looking for literary representation on the novel. I've had my short stories published in over 25 different journals, but the novel is still looking for a home. But at some point, then that gave me some satisfaction. But it was like, okay, I got to do something else now, and that's where my editor, who is a professor at Albright, said, "Have you ever written short stories?" I said, "I have no idea how to write a short story." She said, "Well, you do read short stories. I know you like them. And you like certain authors. You told me." I said, "Well, yeah, it doesn't mean I know how to write them." So she said, she's following me. She went to her office, pulled out a book of probably about 100 short stories. That she says, "I use this to teach my English class. I want you to read these stories, read as many as you want, and then start writing." I said, "Well, how do I?" She said, "Figure it out." It's like everybody's telling me, figure it out. And I was like, okay. So I started writing. I did a couple short stories. She corrected them. She edited them. She structured them. And finally, the one story that's in the anthology, The Box, was got published. Mm. And that was one of the first short stories I had ever written. And then it got published. So from then on, just to say the rest is history, I just kept reading because it's been very cathartic for me. It's been an outlet. It's been an experience. It's been a teaching experience for me. And sometimes when people say, well, have you learned anything about yourself from your writing? I go, yeah, absolutely. If you're being honest with yourself as you're writing, you realize that you may not have been as good a person as you thought you were. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you write your stories, you tend to want to make yourself look better than what you are. Right. But when you really are writing honestly, you look back on it and go like, you know what? I really wasn't that great of a person. Yeah. And in other instances, you could say, I was better than I thought. So the writing it's been the best therapy ever. And I've been writing now for the better part of 8 years. Yeah. And I have no plans on stopping. My first anthology, I have plenty of stories. We can go for a second anthology. And, it's this type of venue, Jess, which really gives me some of the best satisfaction
Mm.
because it's my way of returning. It's my way of giving back. It's my way of hopefully if some person reads it and gets something out of it or listens to my voice and says, yeah, I like that story. Maybe this is something that I want to do.
Mhm.
Then to me, you know what? I that's the best thing for me. That is the best compliment I could ever get.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I hope you don't stop writing. Doesn't sound like you
Thank you.
will.
No, I have no intention. But I want to thank you again, Jess, and for helping to put this together. This has been delightful. Uh, I truly hope that the people that are going to listen to this will find it entertaining as well as informative. And I would say that when you're listening to the stories, get the book, look at the drink menu on there,
Absolutely.
and sit down. And when you're listening to you can share that alcoholic beverage, and you might get more out of the stories.
Yep, there you go. The full experience. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it here at Spring Township and the West Lawn Wyomissing Hills Library. And hopefully we'll have you again for the next anthology then.
I would love that. Thank you very much, Jess. Be safe, stay well, and thank you again for the opportunity. And thank you for those that are viewing this.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good night.